Rafa will kick his ass for 30 seconds. You guys will watch him. You're not gonna say a word.
Are you looking for a mini break? Take one now with the Minibreak podcast and your host, Matt Johnson.
Hello, and welcome to the first episode of the Minibreak podcast. My name's Matt Johnson, and today I'll be bringing you the first part of my chat with fellow tennis lover Shane Jones. Shane is a graduate sports journalist from South Australia, and I met him via Twitter through our mutual love of the sport. Without further ado, here's our chat about some of the happenings leading up to the Australian Open.
I guess first of all, I just want to know how you got into tennis in the first place.
Well, if I'm honest, I don't actually play tennis. I've actually never played tennis professionally, but for a local club in my lifetime. But since I was a little kid, I've just loved watching tennis and spectating tennis. And I guess that's based on the success that Leighton Hewitt has had. I'm an Adelaide boy, so obviously I've supported the local pretty much throughout his career. And just to see his run from when he started in Adelaide all the way through to winning 2 Grand Slams and obviously his Davis Cup success as well, I guess that's really what got me into tennis. And then as uni kicked in and I did my double degree in journalism, I got more interested in tennis. And I guess for me, I love seeing the Australian Open and I love seeing all the Australian events at the start of the year, but it's also fantastic to see that we have so many smaller events around the country as well that gives young up-and-coming Australians the opportunity to not only get some prize money but also get some ranking points and then set them off overseas as well to potentially make them top 100, top 50, top 20 players. So I guess finding out the whole scheme of tennis in the last 2 or 3 years has really got me excited about tennis, and it's a big passion of mine. I love it.
Yeah. Well, actually, first when I was a kid, I used to do swimming. So my interest in tennis wasn't extensive. But at the age of 10, I remember my dad asked me one day, do you want to go to Melbourne Park this January and go and watch the tennis? And I was like, yeah, sure. And we went. I think the match we watched was it was Rafael Nadal's first Australian Open, maybe. It was a match he played against Leighton Hewitt. So I guess there's a bit of a Hewitt connection in both of our tennis stories. But yeah, I remember watching that match and just watching this young upstart coming up against not a seasoned champion, but someone who's done a lot for the sport of tennis here in Australia already. And I was so encapsulated by it all that I just told my parents, I want to pick up a racket. So yeah, did that. Realised soon enough that I probably picked it up too late to enter any sort of professional career. So yeah, I ended up looking at gigs in the media and that sort of where I am now. And I guess I just wanted to also have a bit of a chat about what this podcast is all about. I guess it's not really one of those podcasts where we just talk about the ATP and WTA tours and that's it. We neglect the challenges of futures. We incorporate those tiers into the podcast as well to, I guess, showcase everyone whoever's listening either in Australia or abroad that tennis isn't just made up of the Grand Slams and the Masters and the WTA Premier events. It also includes challenges and multiple tiers of futures as well.
Absolutely. Well, last year here in Australia we had 5 states represented, actually probably all 6 states represented in some form by an Australian Pro Tour event. There was events in Western Australia, there are events in South Australia, there are events in Victoria, there are events in Queensland, events in New South Wales, and events in Tasmania. We had 5 challenges for the men and stacks of challenges for the women as well. So it's not just the Australian Open and the Australian Open Series, which is obviously Sydney, Brisbane, and Kooyong, and a few other tournaments in between as well, Hobart as well. It's not just those specific tournaments that we will cover and focus on. It's also the broader tournaments that goes to remote places. Next week, there's another event on in Port Pirie out in the north of South Australia. So pretty much somewhere near you, there will be a professional tennis tournament not that far away from you, which you can go, and you can go to almost for free. You sometimes hardly even have to pay a gold coin to get in and watch some quality tennis between some of Australia's best professionals and some of the world's best professionals as well. We have some absolutely cracking events in Australia that are just waiting to be explored by multiple people, many people. There are some events, Burnie in particular, is one of the best challenges in the world. It is highly regarded by not just the Australian players and the Australian tournaments that are organised, but it's also held in high regard by the international players as well. And for some of them, it's almost their first stop after the Australian Open to make sure that they can get some more points and not have to travel overseas to Europe or to America. They can save a little bit of money, make sure that they compete in another tournament, and they can pull up to 80 points for their ATP rankings, or for the females, it's now up to 100. So it's certainly great to see so many tournaments here in Australia, and so many tournaments that are widely held in high regard by a lot of players, but yet they're very unknown to a lot of people who just particularly focus on the summer and January and the big events that are on there.
Speaking of January, I reckon let's recap of everything that has happened in the year so far. And of course, the tennis season each year ends up starting here in Australia with the Summer of Tennis. So there's a number of tournaments that are held around Australia throughout the time. There's the Brisbane International, the Hopman Cup, the Hobart International, the Sydney International, the World Tennis Challenge. Yeah, that's on as well. And there's no ranking points that go towards that, but it's still one of the more memorable events in the calendar. And of course, it all culminates in the Australian Open held during the last 2 weeks of January. So, Shane, can you tell me, I guess, a few of your, I guess, memorable moments from, I guess, the entire summer?
Well, for me personally, probably Brisbane was one of the highlights. Obviously, the Australian Open we'll get to in just a second, but for me, probably Brisbane was the highlight for the summer from an Australian perspective, because so many of our players did very well in those tournaments. Leighton Hewitt ended up winning the title. We had Marinko Matosevic in the quarterfinals. We had Sam Groth in the quarterfinals as well. That was the first time in the history of the Brisbane International we had 3 Aussies in the quarterfinals. So it was great to see at the start of the season we had so many Australians being in contention for not only the title but for some brilliant ATP ranking points. And for Groth, he's now getting closer and closer to the top 100. So it's vital for him to make sure that he is successful here in Australia, so he builds a nice platform into the rest of the season. So Brisbane was the big highlight for me. There were a couple of memorable moments in between. Hobart was pretty good for the ladies as well. We saw Olivia Rogowska do well. We saw Katie Delacqua do well as well. And we saw Sam Stosur win a few games as well. And while a lot of people would be expecting her to probably win the tournament, I guess the key is for her, because she has the yips in Australia, and unfortunately it's an overused topic and it's an over talked about topic as well. But it was great to see her take the option to play in Hobart, which probably isn't as strong as Sydney, but make sure that she got a couple of matches under her belt, a couple of wins under her belt as well. And I believe she probably had one of her best Australian Open campaigns in years, based purely on the fact that she was able to pick a different tournament, have a renewed approach to the summer of tennis. And I think that paid not big dividends, but dividends enough for her to say, look, I had a pretty okay summer rather than an absolutely shocking summer, which has unfortunately been the case in the last couple of years.
I think it was a very intelligent approach from Sam throughout the entire summer of tennis. I know in previous years she's normally been one to to tackle both the major tournaments that are going on before the Australian Open. So that's the Brisbane and Sydney tournaments, and of course when they're Premier level tournaments, you get the big names attracted to them, and of course it means that the draws are a lot more stronger, and it could mean that she runs into, I guess, top ranked seeds much early in the tournament. And considering that her ranking compared to this time last year had dropped somewhat, of course that wouldn't have been the best situation for her to be in to, I guess, kickstart her 2014 campaign. So I thought it was particularly smart for, I guess, the reasons that you said, for her to make the choice to head to Hobart to get that match play under her belt. And I also felt that her choice to play the Hopman Cup as well, that was also another good decision as well, because although she wasn't quite as successful over there, she still got a guaranteed 3 matches against quality opposition. So, and I mean, I'm not particularly sure if you watched the match, but her match against Agnieszka Radwanska, that was Sam probably at her best in Australia. Probably one of her best matches she's ever played here in Australia. So I guess that was particularly encouraging to see in the weeks leading up to the Australian Open. And of course, as you said before, she definitely had one of her better campaigns down here.
Absolutely. Another Australian who was her partner for the Hopman Cup, Bernard Tomic, had an interesting summer as well. Pretty much didn't perform as well as you'd like to see at the Hopman Cup. There were a lot of issues in relation to his fitness. A lot of that was scrutinised by the media as well. I'm not so sure whether he was unfit or fit. I think he was somewhere in between. I don't think he was at his optimal fitness level heading into an Australian summer campaign, but I still think he was solid enough to do the results that were required, and that showed the week after in Sydney when he did make the final. He almost defended his title, but ran into Juan Martín del Potro, who is arguably one of the best players in the world at the moment. So it was very, very tough for him to go out and potentially beat him in the final. But I guess before the Australian Open, and we'll get probably to him and what happened between him and Rafael Nadal, but I guess from a summer point of view, from those two tournaments, you probably give him a pass, maybe pass plus, but certainly not compared to the year before when he defeated Djokovic in the Hopman Cup and then won the Sydney title. I think it was probably a disappointing campaign on his behalf, but still an acceptable campaign on his behalf. One that, yep, I'll take a few points out of this. We didn't win the Hopman Cup, but Australia really hasn't had a great deal of success at the Hopman Cup, and a little bit of bad luck along the way as well. So I guess that was playing its part once again. So I guess you take the positives from the negatives with Bernard and you move on. Ideally now he's out for a long period of time as well, which isn't great. But the good thing is that they've at least picked up the hip injury and he can certainly recover from that and then turn out to be a better player than what he was previously when he was struck down with that injury.
Yeah, we'll definitely get to that injury news in a short while, and I guess talk about the reaction it had amongst the Australian public as well as the media that was at the Australian Open as well, because it was definitely there was an interesting debate surrounding it all, especially considering Tomic's reception that he got in Melbourne. But I guess from my perspective, probably one of the more memorable narratives that we had leading up to the Open, and some, I mean, I guess particularly because it was something that I saw in the flesh, was Svetlana Pironkova's run to the title in Sydney. That was unexpected, to say the least. Like, no one would have picked it because she came through qualifying, and I think she ended up having a 3-set match somewhere in there as well. So she definitely wasn't one of the favourites running into the tournament. But then once she got into the main draw, it was a memorable week for her. I mean, she's notorious mainly for her success that she's had at Wimbledon in the past. She's a former Wimbledon semi-finalist, and she's had a couple of other strong performances there. I think there's a quarter final in the mix there as well. But yeah, she pretty much zoned that entire week. She came up against, I think it was 3 consecutive top 10 opponents, and she basically, she just steamrolled them all. It was Angelique Kerber, Petra Kvitova, and Sarah Rani, and she just beat them back to back in straight sets, and it was shocking, but yeah, it was quite a memorable tournament for her.
Yeah, and she had the 3-set battle in the final round of qualifying as well against Shahar Peer. So she could have actually been eliminated in the final round of qualifying, which would have been unreal. Not unreal to see that she got eliminated, but it's unreal that she was able to progress further and then eventually win the title. And it was a similar story in Hobart as well with Garbi Muguruza, who actually qualified as well and then went straight through the tournament and ended up winning as well. So it was amazing that in 2 tournaments in Australia on the same week, 2 qualifiers were able to not only qualify for the event, but then just steamroll through their opponents and ended up winning the title. I mean, Muguruza, I think she played only a few games. She played one match where she probably lost about 10 games, but for the rest, it was 1s and 2s and bagels. She was absolutely dominant that week, and there was no one who could touch her that week. She was in immense form down at Hobart, and then she translated that into the Australian Open as well. So she had a pretty good summer of tennis, but back to Peronkova, she had a great week as well, and it sort of gets rid of the tag that she's just purely a grass player, because a lot of the time, a lot of people would say, oh, great, Peronkova's playing on grass, so she'll go out and win and she'll do really, really well here. But when she translated that to hard courts and clay, well, she really didn't get those results that she got on grass. So it's good to see that she's able to translate that form into the hard courts, and she's continued with that. She's done pretty well in the recent events as well. So she's starting to boost her ranking really nicely. And if she can get her ranking to about 30 by the time Wimbledon, well, she'll be a seed. And suddenly she becomes a big threat to the top players in Wimbledon again, because she won't have to face potentially any of the big players until the 3rd or the 4th round. So she'll have that little bit of an easier route to get through to the 3rd and 4th round if she can get a seeding. So I guess that's something to look out for in the future in the next few events, particularly as we hit Indian Wells and Miami, where you can score lots and lots of points heading into the French Open.
I think both those tournaments really set the tone for how the season has panned out so far. Especially, I guess we've had a couple of winners now in certain tournaments who we really did not expect were going to win it at all. So 2014 has definitely been a year of shock so far, and I mean, hopefully it continues, because for quite a while now we've had the same names pop up at the end of tournaments year in, year out, especially on the men's side, because we've had the Big Four stick around now for quite a number of years. But I mean, to see a couple of names now pop up and sort of take titles unexpectedly and I guess progress deep in tournaments and shock us all, I think it's definitely an interesting time for tennis, especially, as you said, because we are leading up to Indian Wells and Miami, the 2 biggest tournaments outside of the Grand Slams, except for the year-end championships for both tours.
Well, that's exactly right. And heading into those events, realistically, by that time we'd say, oh, Djokovic is going to win, or Murray's going to win, or Nadal's going to win. But realistically, as we head into Indian Wells and Miami, anyone can win it probably out of the top 7. I mean, there is no one you can actually put a circle around and say that they're a shoo-in to win the tournament. I mean, everyone has either a problem or they're in really, really good form, but there's still a question mark relating to whether they can go all the way in Indian Wells. So it's going to be fascinating to see, on the men's side in particular, who will do well in Indian Wells and Miami, because each player has still a respective problem that they're trying to overcome, whether it's form, injuries, or just that they haven't played in a long time. So it's going to be fascinating to see how that all eventuates. And for the women's game as well, Williams has had a long layoff after the Australian Open. Azarenka's also had a long layoff after the Australian Open. Sharapova's not in great form. Lee Na got knocked out quite early last week in the WTA event in Doha. So again, there's that situation as well where realistically there's no circle around a player that they're a shoo-in for the week in Indian Wells or Miami. There are genuine chances. There's probably about 10 chances in both fields to win the tournament, which is just fantastic to see because you'll see some high quality tennis which will go to 3 sets in both men's and women's fields, and we'll see some quality tennis, and you'll see some results that you'll sit there and go, wow, that was a great result, and that was a shock. So I think tennis is starting to hit that the pendulum's starting to swing towards we're getting a more open era again, back to what it was probably the early 2000s when you had Hewitt dominating at the top of the field, but realistically he wasn't winning multiple Grand Slams. You saw Roddick, Safin, Ferrero, those players come in as well and win titles. So I guess we're heading back to that era again, which I think is great because you can see up to 10 players winning championships, which I think is fantastic for the sport because it gives people new options to support, and it's not just the same 4 or the same 3 or the same 2 that head to the top. It's anyone really.
It's going to be interesting to see eventually once the pendulum has swung fully to the other side how I guess audiences are going to react to the new makeup of the tour, particularly considering this whole Big Four narrative has been blown to epic proportions over the last decade now. And that's what audiences have really gotten used to. They've gotten used to the same names winning tournaments. They've really got to know these personalities on quite a personal level because, they're in the media all the time. We're able to understand all their little quirks and what makes them tick and how they play. And we're kind of seeing that being diminished a bit already. I probably wouldn't say anything like the Big Four, the pillars have been broken down as of yet. I think there's still at least another year or 2 where all of them will stay relatively upright. But once that comes, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how audiences react, whether their interest in tennis is still there or because these big names have sort of come and gone and now we're left with the new crop, whether the tennis watching community dynamic is going to change a bit.
I'd like to thank Shane for taking the time out to join me for a chat. Stay tuned as the second part of our talk, which looked at the Australian Open, is not far away. See you then.